black girl woke up before the sun. The house whispered quiet except for the soft hiss of the radiator and the steady tick of the kitchen clock. Her name was Amara, and every morning she folded a uniform that never seemed to keep its newness, braided her hair into a careful style, and stepped into a world that often forgot she had a name beyond maid. The work was honest, sweeping, dusting, polishing the same silver that had been polished 100 times before. But the weight she carried was heavier than any sack of laundry. It was the weight of shoulders that expected less, of eyes that skimmed past her like she was part of the wallpaper. Still, Amara carried a small, defiant light inside her, a melody. She hummed as she worked, low songs that came from the stories her mother used to sing, lullabies folded with the rhythm of their city, songs that stitched together joy and pain. She kept a small notebook tucked into the lining of her coat where she wrote lines and scraps of chorus between making beds and scrubbing sinks. Those words were private, fragile as glass. When she tucked the notebook away, she would touch its cover and remember that she was more than a name pinned to an apron. At the mansion on Willow Street, where chandelier crystals threw rainbows across the mahogany floors, Amara learned to move without being seen. The family never called her by her first name. They called her help, girl, sweetheart, in tones that dripped with faux affection. Sometimes the comments were thinly veiled, a joke about where people like her belong, a compliment edged with pity. And other times the cruel remarks were blunt, leaving an ache in Amara's chest that she carried like a bruise. She endured it with a steady quiet. That was survival. But survival didn't mean surrender. At night, when the house finally slept and the clocks folded the day into a hush, Amara would sit by the small window above the sink and take out her notebook. She would place her palm on the page and whisper the lines as if convincing the words to stay. Black inspirational stories, she wrote once in the margin, like a promise to herself that her story would be told, not as a tragedy, but as a song of rising. One rainy afternoon, a young woman named Lena arrived at the mansion for a party planning meeting. She was warm in a way the household rarely was, and had a smile that reached her eyes. Lena noticed Amara humming as she passed with a tray of drinks. "That tune," she said, stopping. "It's beautiful. Do you sing?" Amara pulled her glance away and kept moving. The tray balanced steady, her voice a tremor inside her ribs. But something in Lena's tone, sincere, curious, made Amara pause beneath the staircase. The tray clinked, and the moment hung like a dropped note. I write," Amara said quickly, thinking only of the notebook. "I sing sometimes." Lena asked where, and Amara shrugged. "In my head," she lied, then laughed softly as if to disguise the truth. Lena didn't let it go. She asked for a line, just one. Amara hummed, the melody spilling out like reluctant sunlight. Lena's smile widened. "That's amazing. You should sing somewhere people can hear you." It would have been a tiny kindness if it stayed there, a principal warmly offered. But Lena did something small that changed everything. She recorded a few seconds on her phone and, with Amara's permission, posted the clip to a tiny community group that celebrated local voices. The response was immediate. Strangers wrote "wow" and "beautiful" under the clip. Someone shared it. Someone else asked where Amara had learned to sing like that. When the first stranger reached out offering a small paid gig at a neighborhood cafe, Amara nearly hid from the news. The idea of stepping out, leaving the familiar fold of the mansion for the bright unknown, terrified her. What would the employers say? What would her mother think? She thought of the notebook, of the lines she'd whispered into the night, and of her throat bursting with songs that needed air. The fear and the fire fought inside her, and she chose the fire. Her first performance was shakier than the video made it look. Her hands trembled, and the cafe lights felt like tiny suns. But the second she started, the room leaned forward. Her voice, roughened by long hours of talking over clanging dishes, softened by the tenderness of childhood lullaby, carried like a bridge. People listened. Necks straightened and eyes glossy, they listened. The owner offered her another slot. A local blogger with a small following featured her in a story about voices you need to hear. The clip spread. Her followers grew. But fame is rarely a straight road. With each step toward the light, the shadows stretched. The mansion's family noticed she was not always there on time, that sometimes she asked for afternoons off. Their tolerance thinned into annoyance. "You're not like other help," the lady of the house sneered one day, her voice laced with contempt. "You think you're above your place." The insult landed like a stone. Amara had no ready answer, only the memory of Lena's kindness and the hum of a chorus waiting in the wings. That night she opened her notebook and wrote a new line. From broom to brilliance. It was not an act of vengeance. It was a ledger entry of potential. Her rise was a patchwork of small victories piled on one another. A performance at a charity gala led to a producer noticing her voice in a compilation video. He told her she had a natural stage presence and invited her to a studio for a demo. Studio life felt alien. Bright microphones, technicians with headphones, the hum of possibility. But Amara learned to stand in the room and own the space the way she owned the kitchen back at the mansion. She learned to shape her voice in ways that made people stand up and listen, not because they felt sorry, but because they were moved. With each new audience, the narratives around her tightened like a noose or sagged like a cape. There were headlines that attempted to shrink her into a trope. Maid becomes singer. Read one, the word maid heavy as if it defined everything. Amara bristled. She was not a novelty. She had been a singer all along. Work had been the side stage on which she refined her endurance. She saw how the stories people told about her could either flatten her or elevate her, and she resolved to shape the narrative. She wrote songs that told the truth, the ache of early mornings, the sting of offhand remarks, the small mercies of a friend who called by her real name. She sang about the notebook tucked in her coat, and about the kitchen window where she dreamed. She sprinkled keywords into her titles and descriptions, phrases like overcoming adversity stories, empowering Black stories, resilience stories, not because she wanted to game a system, but because she wanted the people who needed to hear those songs to find them. When Lena helped her set up a channel, they wrote a description that said simply, "Stories of grit, songs of joy, voices that rise. Subscribe for Black inspirational stories and cinematic AI stories alike." The words connected her to an audience who were looking for exactly that. The pushback grew meaner as her reach stretched. A few critics called her authenticity into question. How could a maid be a star? Others accused her of using her background for clout. That pain could have been a trap. Instead, Amara used it as fuel. She invited critics into the studio. She told her story plainly in interviews, not to curry pity, but to insist on clarity. She said, loud and steady, "I was always a singer. I worked as a maid because life asked it of me. My name is Amara." That simple insistence unstitched assumptions. Sometimes, when the noise of the internet got loud and cruel, she would return to the kitchen where she'd started. She'd stand at the sink, hands in foam, and sing a new verse into the tile echo. The familiar rhythm steadied her. She found a strange joy in bringing back gifts to the people who had been part of her old life. A recording, a sketch, a performance at the community center. She refused to pretend the world was simple. She'd seen both its cruelty and its capacity for uplift. And then came the night that changed the arc of everything. A music festival reached out after a radio host stumbled upon her set and couldn't stop talking about the purity of her voice. The festival was a big one, the kind of stage that made people look twice. The producers offered her a slot on the main stage. The mansion family heard and reacted the way a storm reacts to a ship, with tension. "You can't just leave for that," her employer scoffed. "Who will do your work?" Amara listened, but the answer had been written in her bones. She had a ticket to ride a different course. On stage, a sea of faces poured up at her like a tide. The lights were fierce, but the music wrapped around her like home. She closed her eyes and remembered the little girl who hummed by the sink, the woman who kept a notebook, Lena's phone video, the blogger's feature, the producer's invite. She thought of the many who had been told they were small and had taught themselves to be big. Then she sang, and every note landed like a declaration. The crowd did not murmur. They roared. Clips of the performance circulated, then snowballed. Anchors called her the voice that rose. Playlists featured her songs. People made covers. Thousands of comments poured in saying simply, "We needed this." Her channel, now labeled carefully with tags and terms like Black inspirational stories, AI narrated stories, and overcoming adversity stories, began to show up in recommendation feeds, pulling curious listeners into long-form videos that told not just the music, but the story behind it. The money came, not to buy her freedom, but to buy her choices. She could leave the mansion, attend vocal classes, hire a coach, buy a microphone that would catch the texture of her voice the way she wanted. But more importantly than money was permission, the permission to be seen as whole. She used her growing platform to launch a small scholarship for girls in her neighborhood who wanted to study music. She returned often to the community center, where she taught voice and showed others that dreams could be practiced like a scale until they sang true. Her rise was not a straight ladder. There were nights she doubted, when negative headlines stung and the pressure to always perform wore at her edges. But through it all, she kept the notebook close. She wrote lines for songs and lines for speeches, and she kept writing the story the way she wanted it told. She opened up about what she'd faced on panels, not to indulge trauma, but to show the mechanics of endurance, how to convert hurt into a harness that pulls you forward. In time, the mansion's lady who had once dismissed her sent a handwritten note with a small apology tucked inside. It wasn't a fairy tale repair. Apologies rarely are. It was a human acknowledgement, and Amara accepted it with the full complexity of someone who knew that growth is an ongoing act. She had learned forgiveness and boundaries in equal measure. When people asked her how she made it, how she went from a broom to brilliance, she would smile and point to the simpler truths. "Start where you are," she would say. "Use what you have. Do what you can." She advised young creators to lean into craft, to learn the platforms to tag their work honestly, to use keywords like resilient stories and empowering Black stories so the right people could find them. She urged them to build community, not just audiences, and to protect their inner lives even as they shared publicly. Her story did more than inspire listeners. It created listeners who wanted to be part of the lift. Venues booked her not because she had once been a maid, but because she had a voice that carried truth, and because her songs told stories people recognized in themselves. Her channel became a hub for those searching for Black inspirational stories and overcoming adversity stories, a place of human testimony where the past's pain was honored and the future's possibility was claimed. On quiet mornings, when the house she now owned smelled of coffee rather than bleach, Amara still opened that old notebook. The pages were full now. Lyrics, sketches, notes from collaborators, letters from fans who wrote about finding their own courage. She ran her finger across a familiar line and then, like she had always done, hummed a melody into the dawn. The music had not changed. What had changed was the audience and the authority she held to tell her own story. If there's anything the world seemed to learn from her rise, it was a small, stubborn truth. Dignity is not given, it is carried, like a song through work and through witnesses. Amara's life did not erase the hard mornings or the casual cruelties, but it showed the world the power of choosing to rise. And somewhere, a young girl folding a uniform in the dim light of a kitchen window read about a singer who once shared her name and felt less alone. If you liked this story, a Black fictional story of resilience and triumph, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more cinematic AI-narrated stories about courage, and check out the playlist for more uplifting tales of overcoming adversity. Because every voice deserves an audience and every story a chance to shine.